Breath of the Wild released as an innovation of a formula that had been established for 30 years. The Zelda games had been ones full of exploration, mystery, and wonder, and despite the fact that the games were linear but large leveled, the level of wonder in each area of each game's world was fantastical. Breath of the Wild sought to bring an age-old formula of exploration to a new era of gaming, and in doing so it revolutionized one of the most influential and popular video game genres of all time, bringing it to a new height, one so unprecedented and successful that other franchises would in turn switch suit to change their stagnant formula and once again bring innovation, just like Breath of the Wild excellently did over 5 years ago. Open world games aren't anything new by a long stretch, and the formula itself has existed for almost 20 years. Games created by the most talented people within the industry ingrained innovation and change into a formula that was so much more than anyone could ever imagine. Grand Theft Auto 3, Assassin's Creed, Skyrim, and Far Cry were just some of the games and franchises that continued building up the genre by adding layers of exploration, gameplay, and immersion into what was being processed by the players. The continued approach of the games had continued evolving up until GTA 5, but the stagnation that followed afterwards would not be halted until the release of Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild had stopped a rise in open world games that had become open world particularly out of the desire to copy others without having the necessary ambition to do so. In this, I mean companies that transition franchises or even just singular games into the open world formula without understanding the prowess of the genre. There's many examples out there of open world games that boast an excellently fantastic open world, but when it's dissected, it's obvious that a linear game was stretched to fit an open world structure, and some games still do that to this day. There's many things Breath of the Wild did in order to mix up the formula. Much of this focused on the orientation of the freedom of choice. To do anything at any time was one of the biggest draw points of Breath of the Wild. The ability to climb literally anything that you can see around you destroyed the barriers of movement that was seeping through in open world games at the time, and allowed the developers themselves to create a world so full of bliss and wonder that even to this day players find new and exciting places and mechanics that are only possible when the restriction of movement is wiped off a game's radar. Comparing it to more recent open world games of the time, games like Horizon Zero Dawn held the same formula that had been repeated in countless other franchises and games, and its restrictive nature held it back from the true utilization of its stunning open world due to the linear path that the story will still take you on, despite the existence of such a stunning world full of detail and wonder that just isn't utilized as well as it can be. In comparison to every other open world of the time, in which the games restricted you, confined you to a certain mode of play, only certain abilities were unlocked, and the advent of new areas to explore was locked behind the facets of story progression. This can be seen in Rockstar titles, even one that released after Breath of the Wild. Red Dead Redemption 2 easily has the most stunning open world today. The detail, life, and wonder that's held within the world of bliss that's been handcrafted by the talented developers is wasted when its utilization is purely up to the player's own agency, in which the developers paid no mind to the world when designing the game's missions. The missions never utilize the open world mechanics, and so you're stuck following a linear path when there's a world full of untapped opportunities waiting for you at all times. What Breath of the Wild did is center its entire design philosophy and incentive around the non-linear prowess of its world and missions. Every ability was unlocked from the start. The missions could be tackled in the order that the player chose to do them in, and it allowed for an agency of freedom in which the open world's merits could be utilized for the ease of the player's own journey. What Breath of the Wild did is reinvent the freedom of choice that was the major draw point to open world games when they first came about. The choices of every player, making each individual journey drastically different from the last, create an array of countless different experiences that are all unique and are all fueled by the player's agency and the way that they personally chose to play. In a way, the revolutionized world and design of Breath of the Wild brings forth the notions of the original game. At the time of the original's release, it held adventure within a world that was shaped by the player. In Breath of the Wild, this wonder is recaptured and absolutely liberating when compared to the countless other open worlds that have lost the touch of magic that was first reinvigorated by the advent of Rockstar's finest games. And the open world genre had stagnated to the point where the linearity of an open world game was somehow a point of discussion. There's many obvious examples of the influence Breath of the Wild has had on certain games, like Genshin Impact and Immortals Phoenix Rising, which utilize the facets of Breath of the Wild's gameplay mechanics and the open world's genius in a way that fits the tropes of the developer at hand. But those games aren't the most impactful of Breath of the Wild's revolutionary stature within the open world genre. The freedom of choice is the main point of contention for anyone when discussing how incredibly innovative and revolutionary Breath of the Wild is. To say that it changed how open world games were crafted after its release would be an understatement. Games took the idea of freedom of choice and utilized it to allow the player to play through the game as they pleased. What Breath of the Wild brought back was the facets of player agency, that the player should have major control over what is happening within the world and tackling the game at their own pace in the way that they like. Games tried to push this design through every aspect of the open world due to the many benefits of it. Replayability, gameplay diversity, and the overall immersion in the world is dramatically better when the game offers the player agency within what can actually happen in the world of the game. But there's a lot more to break down in terms of the impact of Breath of the Wild's design, other than the fact that it brought back such a huge mechanic and feature of video games that is a large contributing factor to why games are so fantastic as a medium in the first place. Breath of the Wild relayed to other developers that they shouldn't be afraid of changing the established formula of their series, and despite the fact that it might be a drastic change, innovation can happen within a stagnant franchise to completely revolutionize it and bring it to a new audience of players. This can even be seen in other Nintendo franchises like Pokemon. I don't think it's stupid or even a far-stretched call to say that Pokemon Legends Arceus was impacted by the innovative stance of Breath of the Wild. The formula had been stagnated for so long and needed obvious innovation before fans of the franchise broke and wouldn't be interested in the gameplay design and loop that the games had been offering for decades. Bringing Pokemon into a new age of open world philosophy within its design while configuring the old and working formula around the facets of a new genre is what makes franchises move from a stagnant position to one of innovation. Pokemon Legends Arceus was praised a lot more due to its innovations of the formula, all of which is a result of the impact that Breath of the Wild had on the open world scene. Another series that did this is Sonic. Sure, Sonic Frontiers may not look great at the moment, but Sega would have been inspired by what Nintendo had achieved with Breath of the Wild, and the risk-taking and innovative stance of a completely new point within the series allowed Sega to take the risk and change their formula to appease old and new fans alike. The freedom of choice is a bit more obvious, and I think we can see this in recent games like Elden Ring, which offers a crazy amount of freedom and choice at the agency of the player, and the player is able to do what they will at any time without a restriction of movement or ability that is stagnated by a certain mode of progression. Elden Ring may be one of the biggest examples. Also bringing a hardened formula into a new age and genre was extremely successful, as is evident by the sales and hype surrounding Elden Ring during its release months. Breath of the Wild is one of the most interesting games I've ever played due to its still unrivaled utilization of the open world genre and how it brought forth so much innovation in a genre that had slowly been dying and stagnating to the point of absolute boredom for those that still engaged in it. The formulaic change of the genre brought forth incredible games like Elden Ring and Horizon Forbidden West, and there's obviously much more to come, all as an impact of the changes Breath of the Wild brought forward. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.